Hey, Kylan with Fourth Bikes here, and today we are going to be unboxing and assembling a brand new Fourth 16X2 bike. All we'll be needing today is a set of metric Allen wrenches, a 15mm wrench, and a way to open some packaging, a knife or some scissors. If at any point during this assembly process you feel overwhelmed or feel like there's an issue that you're not able to resolve, feel free to check out our support page on our website, fourthbikes.com, and you can always reach out to your local bike shop. They are the bike professionals. They can assemble bikes, they can make adjustments to bikes, and make sure that your bike is running smoothly and ready for your child to ride. Now let's get this box open. As we pull everything out, you'll notice we have a box. This has some of the components that we'll be using a little bit later. So you just want to kind of pull it clear. And we're going to pull this all out together here. And here is our bike. And we're just going to cut away all the zip ties and all of the protection and padding. We just want to make sure we're not puncturing the tires or scratching the frame or any of the bike parts as we do this. So it's just good to be careful and go slow. Now we have the bike removed and all the packaging removed from the bike itself. I'm going to throw it on the stand and we'll get started with the assembly. The nice thing about most of our bikes is they come mostly assembled. So on this bike, we just have to get the handlebar attached, the front tire and brake installed, as well as the seat and the pedals. Getting started, we're going to remove the rubber plug from the top of the cap on the stem, and we're going to take a 5mm hex wrench and loosen up the stem cap. And just a little bit, enough so that we can see we have that movement freely. Next, we're going to use a 4mm hex wrench to remove the front part of the stem. All 4 of these screws need to come out in order for us to be able to fit the handlebars on. This part can be tricky, and it's making sure that your cables are routed properly when we get this handlebar mounted up top. So what you want to do is make sure that your left brake cable is ran around, actually on the right side and up to the front fork. And then the right brake cable, which goes to the rear, is the opposite. It's ran around the front to the left side and down into the internal housing. Now we're going to take our plate with the 4 screws and line it up here and screw in our front of our stem. Now, before you get it all the way screwed in, I like to get it a little bit snug here with some movement. And what this does is this allows us to start to look at the alignment for the bars. You can see inside the bars we have some notches in the handlebars. This allows us to adjust the alignment to make sure that they're centered within the stem, as well as adjust the angle of our rise. And now we're going to go ahead and tighten down the rest of these bolts. And now that we have the bar aligned and in the place we like it, we can now go back to alignment with the fork and make sure that our bars and stem are lined up well with our fork. Now I'm going to tighten down our stem cap. Now with the stem cap, you do want it snug, but you don't want to go too tight, because if you go too tight, it will actually restrict the mobility of the left to right. So you want to go tight enough to where there's no play in your headset, but not too tight to where you can feel it starting to restrict the turning. So this is a little bit too tight. I can kind of feel it being a little bit restrictive. So I'm actually going to pull it back, quarter turn, and now I can see that that's a little bit free, but I'm not getting any movement or play in my headset or the bearings down into the fork itself. We'll take our 4mm and tighten the remaining 2 stem bolts. Now our stem and our bars are installed and tight. So now while we're up here, I like to go through and check all the bolts on the brake levers as well as the grips themselves. As you can see, these grips are a little bit loose out of the box, so this is just a good thing to come through and tighten these up. Right, now we're ready to move on to the front wheel. So first we have to remove the temporary axle. This is just to help keep the fork in place during travel. This you can just discard. Next, on this bike, since we have disc brakes, you can see that our brake pads are being held spaced out with this piece of plastic. Now, this is important to leave this piece of plastic in until you are ready to install the tire with the brake. And this is one thing to keep in mind too. If you are assembling your bike with your child, just make sure that they're not pulling the brake before the tire is installed. If you pull this spacer out and then pull the brake, especially with hydraulic disc brakes, you could be ruining the alignment and the pressure of the brake itself. So since we are ready to install the tire and the brake, we're going to pull that out. We can discard that spacer as well. And we'll prep the tire. We're going to pull the axle nuts back almost to the end of the threads itself to give us some space to work with. And then we're going to line our tire up here. We want to make sure that we watch the disc go into the brake pads. And then we can look down at our axle itself and get the axle situated. All right, now that we have the brake aligned and our axle in place, we're gonna go ahead and start to tighten down our axle nuts. I have a little bit bigger hands, but what I like to do is hold the tire up and I'm actually pulling pressure to make sure that our axle is all the way in place. And then we're just going to hand tighten the axle nuts on each side. And you'll notice we do have a washer with the holding tab. On this particular bike, the fork actually does not come with the hold for that tab to come in. So you can just make sure that the tab is pointed down, and then you can tighten the axle nuts by hand. Now we're going to take our 15 millimeter and we will tighten it down further, tightening a little bit on each side at a time until we have good tightness there. So sometimes you'll notice when the tire gets installed, there's a little bit of resistance on the brake. So in this situation, we're going to need to make a slight adjustment to the placement of the disc pads. To do this, we're going to take our 5 millimeter and actually loosen these two brake mounting bolts. And now it's just a matter of finding the right spot to tighten them down. Once you get it to a place where there's no resistance, we'll go ahead and tighten those two bolts down. Make sure that our tire spins freely. Now we can see that our brake is aligned, our tire is installed, front part of the bike is ready to go. Let's move on to the back. Now we're going to take the box that we set aside earlier and cut it open to get to our pedals and our seat. I set the seat aside for now. Cut open our pedals. And on bikes, it's really important to make sure you're paying attention to the left versus the right. These are side-specific threaded. It's important that you only try to install the correct side. What I do is set the crank arm straight up and then spin the pedal bolt up and over towards the front of the bike. Once the threads have caught, I'll take our 15 millimeter wrench and tighten the pedal all the way. It's really important to make sure that the pedals are tight. If the pedals aren't tight enough and your child begins to ride the bike with loose pedals, it actually will damage the internal threading and could lead to needing to replace the whole crank arm. So always make sure the pedals are tight when you are putting the pedals on. Do the same thing on the back side. Now that our pedals on, we're gonna move on to the seat. Now with the seat, we'll take the skinny end of the seat post and put it into the receiver on the seat, and then we are going to tighten the bolts on each side of the seat here. While the bolts are still loose, you can actually make adjustments to the seat, both in the placement of it forward and back, as well as the seat angle. Obviously you want to pick a position that's comfortable for your child. For this assembly, I'm going to go in a fairly neutral position here. We're going to take our wrench, tighten down each side until we don't have any more movement. As you can see here, we've got our quick release. We've got it open, we'll slide our seat in place, and then we'll close our quick release. If your quick release closes and the seat is still loose, it means the quick release bolt is not quite tight enough. So we're gonna open it back up. We're gonna turn the bolt clockwise a few turns. Should be tight enough to where you can press it closed, but it really takes some strength to get it there. And that way your seat is not gonna be moving around while your child is trying to ride. Now we have this bike fully assembled. We're gonna get some air in these tires and this bike will be all ready to ride.